The morning rain had turned the city streets dark and slick. Theodore Ashton stood in line at the small coffee shop, shaking droplets from his coat. At 47, he'd learned that some mornings required stronger coffee than others, and this was definitely one of those mornings. The shop was crowded with people escaping the weather. Theodore waited patiently, scrolling through work emails on his phone, half listening to the conversations around him. "I'm so sorry," a woman's voice said ahead of him. "I was sure I had my wallet. Can you just hold the tea? I'll run back to my car and get my purse." If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Comment about a time when someone's small kindness made a big difference in your life. We're all walking through hard days. A little kindness might be exactly what someone needs to keep going. Be that person for someone today. Theodore glanced up. A woman in her mid-30s stood at the counter, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She wore scrubs under a thin jacket, her hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. She looked exhausted in the way that comes from too many double shifts and not enough sleep. "Ma'am, I can't hold beverages," the barista said, not unkindly but firmly. "We're too busy this morning." "Right, of course," the woman said, stepping aside. "I'm sorry for the trouble." She moved toward the door, and Theodore noticed her hands were shaking slightly, not from cold, from stress. He recognized it because he'd been there himself once, long ago, when every dollar mattered and a forgotten wallet felt like the end of the world. Without thinking too hard about it, Theodore stepped forward when his turn came. "Large black coffee," he said, "and whatever she ordered." He nodded toward the woman who was now digging through her pockets near the door, clearly hoping to find some forgotten bills. The barista looked at him, then at the woman. "That's kind of you. Just ring it up," Theodore said quietly. He paid, collected his coffee, and was nearly at the door when the barista called out, "Earl Grey tea, extra honey." Theodore glanced back to see the woman's head snap up in confusion. The barista was holding out the cup and nodding toward Theodore. Their eyes met across the crowded shop. The woman's expression shifted from confusion to understanding to something that looked like she might cry. Theodore did the only thing that felt right. He nodded once, a simple acknowledgement, and walked out into the rain before she could speak. He didn't think about it again until 3 weeks later. Theodore was leaving his office building later than he should have been. The pharmaceutical company he'd built from nothing had become all-consuming. 16-hour days were normal. He barely remembered what his apartment looked like in daylight. His assistant had been nagging him about taking time off. "You're going to burn out, Mr. Ashton," she'd said that morning. "When was the last time you took a vacation?" He couldn't remember. That probably proved her point. Theodore was walking to his car in the underground garage when he heard it. A small sound, a whimper maybe, or a sob. He stopped, listening. There it was again, coming from behind a concrete pillar. "Hello," Theodore called out, approaching carefully. A young woman sat on the ground, her back against the pillar, hugging her knees. She wore business casual clothes, and her laptop bag lay beside her. She was crying quietly, trying to muffle the sound. "Are you hurt?" Theodore asked. "Do you need me to call someone?" The woman looked up, startled. She wiped her eyes quickly. "I'm fine, sorry, I'm fine." She was clearly not fine. Theodore hesitated. Every instinct told him to walk away, to respect her privacy, to not get involved. But something stopped him. He thought about his own rock-bottom moment, years ago, when he'd sat in a similar garage after losing everything, and not a single person had stopped. "I'm going to sit down for a minute," he said, settling onto the ground a respectful distance away. "You don't have to talk. I'm just going to sit here." The woman stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. "Why?" Because I once had a breakdown in a parking garage, Theodore said honestly. And nobody stopped. Nobody asked if I was okay. And I spent the next year thinking maybe if someone had, things would have been different. The woman's lips trembled. I just got fired. After 3 years of working 70-hour weeks of sacrificing everything, they fired me. Budget cuts. Nothing personal. Just business. She laughed bitterly. I don't even know why I came down here. I should go home. But I can't face my empty apartment and admit that I gave everything to a company that threw me away like garbage. Theodore knew that feeling intimately. 15 years ago, he'd been exactly where she was, fired from a job he'd poured his soul into, sitting in a parking garage, wondering if anything mattered. No one had stopped that day. No one had cared. But a stranger had bought him coffee the next morning, had paid for it quietly and left before Theodore could say thank you. That small act, that tiny gesture, had reminded him that kindness still existed, that maybe he could rebuild, that maybe the world wasn't entirely cruel. The company doesn't deserve your tears, Theodore said gently. I know, she said, but I can't seem to stop crying anyway. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Theodore didn't offer platitudes or advice. He just sat there, a quiet presence in her moment of devastation. He remembered how much that would have meant to him all those years ago. Finally, the woman stood. Thank you, she said, for not walking past, for sitting with me. I needed that more than you know. Take care of yourself, Theodore said. And for what it's worth, any company that lets you go is making a mistake. You'll find something better, something that deserves you. She smiled weakly and walked toward the exit. Theodore remained sitting for a moment longer, thinking about circles, about how the kindness we receive eventually becomes the kindness we give, about how we're all just trying to survive, and sometimes the smallest gesture makes survival possible. The weeks passed. Theodore continued his routine of work and more work. He attended board meetings, negotiated contracts, made decisions that affected thousands of employees. But he found himself doing small things too, paying for the person behind him in the drive-thru, leaving generous tips, holding doors, helping. Elderly people carry groceries to their cars, small acts that cost him nothing, but might mean something to someone else. He never stayed to be thanked. He didn't want gratitude. He just wanted to put a little more kindness into a world that often felt harsh. He wanted to be for others what that stranger had been for him all those years ago. Then came the conference. Theodore's company was hosting a major pharmaceutical industry event. Hundreds of professionals, potential partners, investors. He'd been dreading it for weeks. These events were exhausting, full of small talk and networking and performing the role of successful CEO. He was delivering his keynote speech when he saw her, the woman from the coffee shop, the one with the tea. She was sitting in the third row wearing professional attire, a conference badge around her neck. She was staring at him with wide eyes, clearly recognizing him. Theodore stumbled over his next sentence, recovered, and finished his speech on autopilot. His mind was racing. What were the chances? After the speech, he was immediately surrounded by people wanting to talk to him. He smiled, shook hands, made polite conversation, all while watching the woman from the corner of his eye. She didn't approach. She stayed back, near the edge of the crowd, waiting patiently. Finally, when the last of the networking crowd had drifted away, she stepped forward. Mr. Ashton, she said, I'm Grace Palmer. I'm a nurse practitioner, and I've been working with one of your research teams on a clinical trial for pediatric medications. Miss Palmer, Theodore said, shaking her hand. It's good to meet you. You paid for my tea, Grace said quietly. 3 months ago, at the coffee shop on 7th Street. You walked away before I could thank you. Theodore remembered. It was just tea. It wasn't just tea, Grace said, her voice firm but kind. I was having the worst day of my life. I'd just worked a 30-hour shift in the emergency room. We'd lost a patient, a little girl, only 7 years old. I couldn't save her. Her parents blamed me. Maybe they were right to blame me. I was so tired I could barely stand, and I couldn't even afford a cup of tea because I'd forgotten my wallet in my car. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. And then this stranger paid for it, didn't make a big deal about it, didn't wait for thanks. Just did something kind and walked away. Grace's voice cracked. It was such a small thing. But in that moment, it felt like the universe was saying I wasn't alone, that kindness still existed, that maybe I could keep going, that maybe I wasn't a failure just because I couldn't save everyone. Theodore felt his throat tighten. I'm glad I could help. You did more than help, Grace insisted. You reminded me why I became a nurse, to help people, to do small things that might matter, to be there in someone's worst moment. You have no idea how much I needed that reminder. I was ready to quit, to walk away from medicine entirely. But your kindness made me think maybe there was still good in this work. Maybe there was still good in me. They talked for several minutes. More Grace told him about the clinical trial she was working on, a new treatment for childhood leukemia. Her eyes lit up when she spoke about the children she worked with, the families she supported through impossible situations. I started something, Grace said. A support group for emergency room staff. We meet once a week and talk about the hard cases, the losses, the guilt. We remind each other that we're human, that we can't save everyone, but that doesn't mean we should stop trying. I learned that from you, from a cup of tea and a stranger who cared enough to help without needing credit. As she left, Grace turned back. Thank you, Mr. Ashton, for the tea, and for being the kind of person who does kind things without needing recognition. The world needs more of that. More of you. Theodore watched her go, feeling something shift in his chest. He'd been so focused on building his company, on success and growth and profit, that he'd forgotten what it all meant. The pharmaceutical company he'd built was supposed to help people, but when was the last time he'd actually met one of those people? When was the last time he'd connected his work to real human impact? That evening, Theodore made a decision. He established a foundation within his company, not for tax benefits or publicity, but to do quiet good, to pay for medical treatments for families who couldn't afford them, to fund research into diseases that weren't profitable enough for big pharma to care about, to support healthcare workers who were burning out from impossible demands, to do for others what someone had once done for him. And he made one more change. Every Friday he left the office at noon. He spent those afternoons volunteering at a free clinic, doing whatever was needed, filing paperwork, cleaning examination rooms, talking to patients who needed someone to listen, sometimes just sitting with people who were scared or alone. He met Grace again there 6 months later. She was volunteering too, on her day off, teaching a class on basic first aid to low-income families. Mr. Ashton, she said, surprised, what are you doing here? Call me Theodore, he said, and I'm doing what you taught me, helping people, doing small things that might matter. Grace smiled warmly. I didn't teach you that. You already knew it. You just needed to remember. They became friends, working side by side at the clinic. Grace introduced him to other volunteers, people who worked exhausting jobs but still showed up to help others. Teachers spending weekends tutoring struggling students, firefighters coaching youth sports teams, nurses running health education programs, social workers organizing community meals, people who did difficult, underappreciated work and then spent their free time doing more work, unpaid, just because it mattered. Theodore found something in those Friday afternoons that his boardroom meetings had never given him. Purpose, connection, the satisfaction of making someone's day a little better, one small act at a time. A year after the conference, the woman from the parking garage contacted his office. Her name was Jennifer, and she'd landed on her feet after being fired, started her own consulting business helping companies build better workplace cultures. It was thriving. "I wanted to thank you," she said when they met for coffee, "for sitting with me that day, for not walking past. It sounds strange, but that moment changed something for me. Made me realize I was worth more than a company that didn't value me. That my worth wasn't defined by whether they kept me or fired me." "I'm glad you're doing well," Theodore said sincerely. "I started something," Jennifer continued. "A support group for people who've been laid off. We meet twice a month. I sit with them, listen to them, help them remember they're not garbage, no matter what their former employers made them feel. Help them see that losing a job isn't losing their value. I learned that from you, that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is just be present for someone else's pain, to witness it, to say without words that they're not alone." She paused, stirring her coffee. "I also started volunteering at a crisis hotline, taking calls from people who are at their lowest point. Sometimes I don't know what to say. Sometimes there are no right words, but I can be there. I can listen. I can care. That matters more than I ever realized." After the conversation, Theodore sat in the coffee shop for a long time, thinking about kindness, about how the smallest acts ripple outward in ways we never see, about how we're all connected by the moments we show up for each other, even when it's inconvenient, even when we're tired, even when we get nothing in return. He thought about the tea he'd bought without a second. Thought about the stranger he'd sat with in a parking garage. About all the small kindnesses people had shown him over the years. The teacher who'd stayed after school to tutor him when he was failing math. The landlord who'd given him extra time when he couldn't make rent. The colleague who'd recommended him for a job when he desperately needed one. The stranger who'd bought him coffee on the worst morning of his life. Every success he'd achieved had been built on a foundation of people who'd helped him when they didn't have to. People who'd shown kindness without expecting anything back. That evening, Theodore returned to the coffee shop on 7th Street. The same barista was working, older now, with gray threading through her hair. "Large black coffee," Theodore said. Then on impulse, "And I'd like to set up an account. Prepaid, enough for 500 drinks. When someone comes in and can't afford their order, give it to them. Don't tell them where it came from. Just say someone already paid. And when the account runs low, call me. I'll refill it." The barista's eyes widened. "That's incredibly generous, sir." "It's just coffee," Theodore said. "But maybe it's coffee that comes on the day someone really needs to know the world isn't entirely harsh. Maybe it's the difference between giving up and trying one more day. You never know. This will help a lot of people," the barista said softly. "We get folks in here all the time who are struggling. I wish I could help them all, but I can't. This will let me help at least some of them." Theodore paid and left before she could thank him more. He didn't need thanks. He needed to know that somewhere, on some random Tuesday morning, someone struggling through an impossible day would get a small reminder that kindness still existed. Walking to his car, Theodore thought about Grace's words. That small kindnesses remind us we're not alone. That they help us keep going when everything feels impossible. He thought about all the people struggling through difficult days right now, in this moment. The exhausted healthcare workers, the laid-off employees, the parents worried about money, the students overwhelmed by pressure, the elderly people forgotten by busy families, the lonely, the hurt, the overwhelmed, the despairing. And he thought about how easy it was to help, how little it cost to pay attention, to notice, to care. How a $5 cup of tea or 10 minutes sitting with a stranger could change a life's trajectory. Theodore had built an empire. He had wealth most people couldn't imagine. But the richest moments of his life hadn't come from closing deals or seeing profits rise or being featured in business magazines. They'd come from a cup of tea bought for a stranger, from sitting with someone in their darkest moment, from remembering that success means nothing if we don't use it to ease the burden of others. The man who walked away without a word had spoken volumes through silence. He'd said that kindness doesn't require recognition, that helping others doesn't need applause, that the most meaningful things we do are often the smallest, that we help because someone once helped us and because someone might need help tomorrow. And sometimes those small things ripple outward, touching lives in ways we'll never fully know, creating chains of kindness that extend far beyond what we can see. Grace went home that evening and paid for groceries for the woman behind her in line. Jennifer sat with a stranger who was crying in a restaurant bathroom. The barista gave free coffee to a homeless man and sat with him for a few minutes, just talking. Kindness multiplying, spreading, growing, all because someone bought tea and walked away without a word.